Chapter 26. There was a secret in the Su family, a secret about the eldest daughter of the Su family. When people talked about Su Rochu, the eldest daughter, even 7 years later, they still remembered her beauty and vibrant personality. However, 7 years ago, something destroyed Su Rochu. Outsiders believed that she had gone abroad to marry, but in reality, she never left. She remained confined to the room on the top floor of the Su family villa. Su Anan rushed back to the Su family in a panic. She was worried about her sister's safety and afraid of retaliation from Su Hua and Su Zihan. It had only been a day since the incident, but they had already started to take action. In the hall, Su Zihan and Jiang Mei were waiting for Su Anan. Su Anan, what are you doing here? Su Zihan demanded, as Su Anan walked into the living room. Just as Su Anan was about to head upstairs to the top floor, Su Zihan blocked her path. No one is allowed to go to the top floor without my father's permission, Su Zihan said with a smirk, fully aware of why Su Anan was there. Today she wanted to see if Su Anan still dared to defy her. Get out of the way, Su Anan said coldly and harshly. She couldn't afford to care about anything else at that moment, and directly pushed Su Zihan aside. Su Zihan staggered backward a few steps, her eyes glaring hatefully at Su Anan's retreating figure as she ascended the stairs. When Su Zihan attempted to chase after her, Jiang Mei stopped her. Zihan, what's the rush? Jiang Mei said lightly, her gaze also following Su Anan's back. On the top floor of the Su family villa, there was only a single streetlight. The entire corridor was dark, and the sound of Su Anan's hurried footsteps echoed clearly in the stillness. Typically, without Su Hua's permission, Su Anan couldn't even set foot there. But right now, she didn't care about permissions or rules. The door to the room was locked. Su Anan stood at the door, staring at the iron lock, her eyes reddening. Hima had called to inform her that her sister had been running a high fever since the morning, and no one had bothered to check on her. Even now, after hours of fever, no one in the Su family had called for a doctor. Her elder sister was a taboo subject in the household. Why else would the esteemed Su Hua keep her locked away in that room instead of sending her to a mental hospital for treatment? Through the window on the metal door, Su Anan could barely make out the dimly lit room and the figure lying on the bed. Elder sister, she called out urgently. There was no response from inside. The entire corridor was eerily silent. Su Anan pressed herself against the door, straining to hear any sound, a cough, a breath, even the faintest moan. But there was nothing. Silence. She knew her family didn't care about Su Rochu's well-being. Who would care about the life of someone they deemed a madwoman? Open the door, Su Anan demanded as she rushed back downstairs to Jiang Mei. She knew Jiang Mei had the key and realized they had intentionally waited for her at home, expecting this confrontation. Did you let my sister catch a cold on purpose? Su Anan asked, her voice trembling with anger. Her question had no effect on Jiang Mei or Su Zihan, but it underscored the cruelty of the situation. This was the Su family. They held the sickly Su Rochu's life in their hands, and Su Anan still dared to challenge them. Su Zihan laughed mockingly. Anan, what door are you talking about? Anan, is this how you speak to me? Jiang Mei said calmly, sitting on the sofa and watching television. She turned to Su Anan with a smile. Softening her tone, Su Anan pleaded, Auntie, could you please open the door to the room on the top floor? Her voice cracked slightly, but her determination remained steadfast. She couldn't leave her sister in that condition any longer. Chapter 27. And Anne, there's just a pile of junk on the top floor. Why are you so eager to open it? Jiang Mei asked with a faint smile, feigning ignorance. Su Anan froze. Deep down, she understood that this was their way of taking revenge on her. It had always been this way. When they bullied her and she resisted, they would retaliate against her elder sister. As for Su Hua, he only had eyes for this mother and daughter. He cared little for Su Anan or her sister. Auntie, my elder sister has a high fever. Please open the door and let me in, Su Anan pleaded, softening her tone and looking at Jiang Mei with desperation. Only then did Jiang Mei regard Su Anan directly. She chuckled and said, Anan, it's not that I don't want to open the door. You know that it requires your father's permission. As she spoke, Su Hua entered the room. His surprise at seeing Su Anan quickly turned into anger. Su Anan, what's wrong with you? I've called you so many times, and you didn't answer once. And why didn't you return the jade pendant to the Mu family last night? Do you still dream of marrying into the Mu family? Su Hua demanded furiously. Father, Su Anan said softly, her eyes reddening. So Gumo Cheng agreed to visit the Su family? Su Hua said, his tone sharp. Su Anan shook her head and hurried toward Su Hua. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Daddy, elder sister has a high fever. Please call a doctor to check on her. At her words, Su Hua's face darkened. It wasn't concern for Su Rochu's health that upset him, but the fact that Su Anan dared to mention Su Rochu without his permission. Anan, what nonsense are you spouting? Su Hua said angrily. Your sister married and moved abroad 7 years ago. She hasn't been back since. This was the lie the Su family perpetuated to the outside world, that Su Rochu had married and lived overseas. Dad, then let's call a doctor to check on the person on the top floor. She's very sick, Su Anan insisted. Her sister had been unwell for an entire day. If this continued, it might cost her life. Big sister has been burning with fever since this morning. If it continues, she might not survive, Su Anan pleaded desperately. If she doesn't survive, then so be it. Su Zihan's scornful and disdainful voice rang out before Su Anan could say more. Junmei, noticing her daughter's boldness, interjected. Zihan, don't speak carelessly. There are no mad women in this house, Junmei added, her voice calm and measured. Suwa said nothing. He sat on the sofa with a grim expression. Once, he had been proud of his smart and beautiful daughter. Now, he despised the shame her condition brought to his family. Daddy, I'm begging you, Su Anan said, standing in front of Suhua. She lowered her head, her voice filled with desperation. When her sister had gone mad, Su Anan had been only 12 years old. She vividly remembered her once bright and capable sister's sudden descent into madness. Suhua had locked Su Rochu in a dark room on the top floor, cutting her off from the world. At the time, Su Anan couldn't understand her father's cruelty. Her sister was ill. Why wouldn't he call for a doctor? Why did he confine her instead? Over time, she understood. Suhua couldn't bear the thought of the world knowing he had a mentally unstable daughter. The shame would have been too great for him to endure. Dad, please call a doctor who doesn't know us. No one will find out, Su Anan urged again, tears welling in her eyes. Suhua lit a cigarette and took a long drag, ignoring her pleas. Have Hima bring some medicine over, Suhua said curtly. A fever won't kill her. Su Anan's heart sank at his callous words, but she knew she couldn't give up. Her sister's life depended on it. Chapter 28, Su Anan was shocked. Even at this point, Suhua still refused to call a doctor to check on Su Rochu. Daddy, if this goes on, my elder sister might lose her mind, Su Anan said, her voice trembling with frustration. She laughed bitterly at her own words. Lose her mind? Wasn't her elder sister already broken? Suhua didn't care whether the fever caused further harm. To him, it made no difference. Seeing Suhua's grim expression, Su Anan curled her lips into a cold smile. Su Rochu might have gone mad, but she was still Suhua's biological daughter, the once prized jewel in his eyes. Suhua's actions had driven Su Rochu to madness. All right, Su Anan snapped. She stopped begging and gritted her teeth, glaring at Suhua with hatred. If you won't call a doctor for my sister, I will do it myself, she declared. And when I do, not only will the people in this house know that Su Rochu has gone mad, but the entire Peace City will learn that the eldest daughter of the esteemed Suhua is a madwoman. Her voice rose with each word. Everyone will also know that to protect your reputation, you've imprisoned her on the top floor of the Su family villa for 7 years. Do you think anyone will want to do business with you after that? The more she spoke, the angrier she became. Her chest heaved with the intensity of her emotions. For a fleeting moment, she truly wanted to run out and expose all of Suhua's misdeeds from the past 7 years. As Su Anan's words cut through the air, Suhua's expression darkened further. He crushed the cigarette in his hand, extinguishing it halfway, while Junmei and Su Zihan sat silently on the sidelines, waiting for him to erupt in anger. This girl really doesn't know her place, they thought. Dad, don't push me. If worst comes to worst, we can tear this family apart. If my sister is gone, you can forget about controlling me. I won't stay in the Gu family any longer. She looked him straight in the eyes. And when that happens, Gumo Cheng will never forgive the Su family. He'll cut all ties with you, personally and professionally. Su Anan, Suhua roared, his voice thunderous with rage. You ungrateful girl, how dare you threaten me? He slammed the ashtray onto the ground, shattering it, then rose to his feet. With a furious swing of his arm, he struck Su Anan across the face. The slap echoed through the room, sending her sprawling to the ground. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth as she lay there, stunned. Tears welled up in her eyes but didn't fall. She stared at Suhua's furious face, the smug look on Junmei's, and the mocking sneer of Su Zihan. The tears threatened to spill, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry, not in front of them. It wasn't the first time Suhua had hit her. She had been struck so many times that she had lost count. Each slap stung, but it also fueled her determination. You wicked girl. Suhua shouted, his voice laced with fury. Junmei quickly stood up and held him back. Hubby, stop, please calm down. Suhua glared at Su Anan one last time before turning to Junmei. Don't think that just because you're with Gumo Cheng, you can defy me, he snarled. I put you in the Gu family, and I can just as easily get Gumo Cheng to throw you out. He pointed a finger at her. Try saying one more word to Gumo Cheng and see what happens. Hubby, you've had a long day and must be tired. Go upstairs and rest, Junmei said soothingly. Suhua looked at her, nodded, and said softly, all right. He turned back to Su Anan, his expression icy. Behave yourself, he warned before heading to the second floor. Su Anan watched him retreat, her eyes blazing with anger, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. As Suhua disappeared upstairs, she finally spoke in a quiet but firm voice. Get my sister a doctor. Her words hung in the air, resolute and unwavering. Chapter 29. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. When Suhua, already on the second floor, heard this, he stopped in his tracks. He turned his head slightly, catching sight of Su Anan's determined face. Mayor, go to the clinic and find a doctor, Suhua instructed Junmei. Just tell them Zihan is sick. After Suhua left, only Su Anan, Su Zihan, and Junmei remained in the living room. The servants had already been sent away by Junmei. Having followed Suhua for many years, Junmei understood what he cared about. She had mastered the art of patience and manipulation. It was this cunning that had allowed her to anger Suanan's mother to death and take her place as the Su family's matriarch. Once Su Hua was gone, Jiang Mei rose from the sofa and walked over to Suanan. Seeing Suanan's swollen face brought her immense satisfaction. Su Zihan followed closely. She had been suppressing her fury ever since Suanan slapped her 2 days ago. If not for her mother's intervention, she would have retaliated on the spot. But now, the moment had come. Anan, your face is so swollen, Su Zihan said mockingly. She reached out a hand, but Suanan turned her head, refusing to let her touch it. Even now, Suanan dared to resist. Su Zihan sneered coldly. Father told my mother to find a doctor for your sister. We're working on it now, but maybe we'll wait until tomorrow morning. Those words made Suanan's heart sink. She spoke, her voice icy. What do you want? Su Zihan's gaze turned vicious. You slapped me 2 days ago, she hissed, her tone sharp. Who do you think you are, Suanan, daring to lay a hand on me? Without warning, Su Zihan raised her hand and struck Suanan's swollen cheek. Suanan flinched but didn't move to avoid it. Seeing Su Zihan's smug expression, she thought of her elder sister. She decided to endure. The slap landed hard, the pain searing through her face. Su Zihan's glee grew. Didn't you claim Gu Mocheng would come after me if I hurt you? Su Zihan taunted. You're nothing more than a Su family pawn, a gift to the Gu family. And you think you're Madame Gu? Her anger flared as she continued. Who do you think you are? Every time we go out, people only talk about Su Rochu and you, Suanan. Do you know how humiliating that is? I'm the daughter of the Zhang family, which is just as powerful as the Su family. Why should I be overshadowed by you, the daughter of a lowly woman? As Su Zihan's rant escalated, she slapped Suanan repeatedly, her fury driving her to exhaustion. Finally, her hand fell limp. Suanan, her face now swollen and bruised, looked at her tormentor with calm, tearless eyes. Her silence only seemed to enrage Su Zihan further. Jiang Mei intervened at last. That's enough, she said smoothly. She looked at Suanan with thinly veiled disdain, but maintained her composed demeanor. Mom, I'm not done yet, Su Zihan protested, glaring at her mother. Jiang Mei took her hand gently. Zihan, your hand must hurt. Let's rest for now. Hearing this, Su Zihan finally noticed the stinging pain in her palm. She glared at Suanan again, blaming her for the discomfort. Suanan, ignoring the pain and humiliation, raised her head to address Jiang Mei. Auntie, can we bring a doctor now? Jiang Mei turned to meet Suanan's gaze. The young woman's face was a swollen, bloody mess, yet her eyes remained cold and resolute. There were no tears, only quiet defiance. For a brief moment, Jiang Mei felt a twinge of unease. But she quickly dismissed it. Suanan's mother was long gone. Su Hua didn't care for her. And Su Rochu, well, she was just a madwoman. Suanan had no one left. Or so Jiang Mei thought. What she failed to consider was that Suanan now had Gu Mocheng. Even if Su Hua had sent her to the Gu family as a pawn, Gu Mocheng's influence was undeniable. Meanwhile, at a small clinic on a quiet street, Han Longyi was preparing to close up for the night when an urgent knock came at the door. Reluctantly, he decided to answer it. Saving a life, he reasoned, was worth the effort. Arriving at the Su family villa, Han Longyi couldn't help but feel curious. This neighborhood was home to the elite of Peace City. What kind of emergency could have brought him here? As he stepped inside, a girl with a badly swollen face rushed to greet him. Doctor, please come quickly, she said anxiously. Without waiting for a response, she turned and led him toward the stairs. Pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, Han Longyi followed her, studying her carefully. She looked familiar. By the time they reached the top floor, he remembered. This was Gu Mocheng's wife. He had met her once before when Gu Mocheng had called him to treat his dog. At the time, Han Longyi had marveled at the fact that the renowned bachelor had finally settled down, and with a woman in her 20s, no less. Miss Suanan? Han Longyi ventured cautiously. Yes, she replied distractedly. Her thoughts were consumed by her sister's condition. She barely registered his recognition. Doctor, please, this way. With urgency in her steps, she led him to the top floor. Chapter 30. Although Gu Mocheng had not officially accepted the marriage certificate from Suanan, his actions spoke volumes. By bringing her into his home and being with her intimately, he was clearly treating her as his wife. Formalizing the relationship was only a matter of time. When Han Longyi reached the top floor of the Su family villa, he was surprised by the eerie silence of the dark corridor, broken only by the sound of his and Suanan's footsteps. He had never imagined that someone lived on the top floor of the Su family home. Following Suanan into a room, Han Longyi found himself in a dimly lit and quiet space. Suanan had been there earlier, using a towel to cool her elder sister's fever. From Hima's account, Suanan had learned that her sister had been unwell since breakfast, but Jiang Mei had dismissed it as a minor issue not worth bothering over. Sister, Suanan exclaimed as she hurried to the bedside. She grabbed Su Rochu's burning hot hand and called out to her. Han Longyi froze at the term sister. To his knowledge, Suanan was Su Hua's youngest daughter. The woman on the bed couldn't possibly be Su Zihan, who was Jiang Mei's child and highly favored by Su Hua. So who was this woman? Peering through the dim light, Han Longyi caught a glimpse of Su Rochu's delicate, fever-flushed face. Even in her sickly state, her beauty was undeniable. For a moment, he stood transfixed. Meanwhile, in Jingcheng, Gu Mocheng attended a banquet hosted by the Shu family. Reclining in his chair with a glass of wine, he half-heartedly acknowledged the gentle smiles and conversations directed at him by the women nearby. Gumo Cheng had never entertained women he wasn't interested in, and tonight was no exception. Over the years, Suanan had been the only woman to break through his carefully guarded world. From the moment he had chosen her, she became his wife in every sense. During the banquet, Gumo Cheng's phone buzzed with a call from Han Longyi. "Second brother, where are you?" Han Longyi's voice carried a sense of urgency. "Jing Cheng," Gumo Cheng replied. "Second brother, you need to come back immediately. Someone's beaten your wife." Gumo Cheng's expression darkened. "Explain," he said tersely. Han Longyi recounted how he had been called to the Su family villa to treat someone, only to discover Su Anan with a swollen, bruised face. He refrained from mentioning the mysterious woman on the top floor, focusing instead on Su Anan's injuries. As Gumo Cheng listened to the description of his wife's condition, his face grew even grimmer. He had always been aware of the hardships Su Anan faced in the Su family, but hearing this ignited a fury within him. The banquet's lively atmosphere seemed to chill as Gumo Cheng stood abruptly, his mood unmistakably dangerous. "Arrange a flight back for Sunday," he instructed his assistant coldly. "Sir, we have a meeting scheduled with Shu in the morning," the assistant reminded him nervously. Gumo Cheng's ashen expression made it clear this was not a request. "We'll go to the airport as soon as it's done," Gumo Cheng said sharply, leaving no room for discussion. Back at the Su family villa, Su Anan stayed by her sister's side through the night. Though the doctor had treated Su Rochu's fever, Su Anan's worry kept her awake. When the fever finally broke in the early hours of the morning, she felt a surge of relief. "Elder sister," Su Anan said softly, tears streaming down her face as Su Rochu opened her eyes. "You're awake. Are you feeling better?" Su Rochu stared at her silently, her gaze lingering on Su Anan's bruised face. Reflexively, Su Anan tried to cover it, but the damage was too obvious. When Su Rochu finally spoke, her voice was faint. "Ah Sheng." Hearing the name, Su Anan's heart ached. It was always the same. For 7 years, Su Rochu had spoken only that name, never recognizing Su Anan or anyone else. "Sister, when will you come back to me? Please don't leave me alone," Su Anan whispered, her tears falling freely. Su Rochu smiled faintly, a childlike expression crossing her face before she closed her eyes and fell back into sleep. Su Anan's heart felt heavy as she watched her sister retreat into her fragile, detached world once more. Returning to the Gu mansion, Su Anan tried to avoid Uncle Chen's concerned questions. Exhausted from the sleepless night, she couldn't bring herself to rest. Her thoughts were consumed by her sister's plight. A call from her friend Fuxin briefly broke through her melancholy. "Anan, come out and play," Fuxin urged, her cheerful voice a stark contrast to Su Anan's somber mood. "Xiaoxin, I'm not in the mood," Su Anan replied warily. Sensing something was wrong, Fuxin didn't push. Instead, she shifted the conversation. "Do you remember the last time we went car racing? Someone's investigating the participants. But don't worry, it's not Gumo Cheng. It's his friend, Xiao Yan." Su Anan gave a half-hearted reply. "Oh, don't worry," Fuxin added reassuringly. "I told Big Brother, and he promised to handle it." Despite her troubles, Su Anan managed a small, bitter smile. Fuxin's brother had always been protective, treating her like family. In moments like these, Su Anan envied Fuxin's unwavering support system. "Thank you, Xiaoxin," Su Anan said, her voice tinged with gratitude. The call was a brief comfort amid her struggles, but even Fuxin's warmth couldn't erase the shadow of the Su family's cruelty. Su Anan's heart remained heavy, weighed down by the burden of her sister's condition and the wounds, both physical and emotional, inflicted by those who should have protected her.